So he left Georgetown without his PhD, but actually went to start one of the many companies that he's an entrepreneur at heart, so he knows what running a business is all about. And he left Georgetown, started running one of his businesses, and in fact grew it to a multi-million entity. And again, how honored we are that he is now at the helm of Conscious Capitalism, Inc. He just moved to Austin. Actually, he and Steve both live in Texas, though they're both in Florida right now. And certainly our hearts are out to you and all your fellow Texans. But one other thing I'll share about Alexander is he's going to be a nomad. We learned this in the tech check, that he's actually going to be traveling the country, meeting with leaders from all over and exploring different markets. So we'll have to hear a little bit more about that. So it is my pleasure to introduce Alexander McCobin, the CEO of Conscious Capitalism, Inc. Thank you, Alexander, for being here.
Thank you, Kim, for that generous introduction and for founding and leading the Indianapolis chapter of Conscious Capitalism. And I want to say thank you to everyone joining today. It's so exciting to see so many conscious capitalists together in this Zoom call to kick off the year and really talk about what the future holds for conscious capitalism. But it's not going to be just me talking. I'm really excited to have a conversation with one of Conscious Capitalism's board members and a longtime conscious capitalist himself. For anyone who doesn't know Steve Hall, over the last 2 decades, he's been a founder, CEO, and board member of automotive technology, finance, retail, and wholesale organizations, ranging from startups to those at over $2 billion in revenue. He was the founder and CEO of driversselect, a national discount retailer which was sold in 2017 to the Sonic Automotive Group, where he led the integration and rollout of the Echo Park business unit to over $1 billion in sales. And he did all of this with a business model based on the principles of conscious capitalism. And it's through his active involvement with conscious capitalism that led him to join the board and become more active in supporting conscious capitalists around the country and building this movement. And Steve, I just want to say thank you for taking time out of your schedule to join us for this call today.
Looking forward to it.
Now, this is going to be a conversation. So if at any point anyone has any questions or things you want to throw in, feel free to type them into the chat box so that we're able to address them either real time or when we get to more of a Q&A after about the first 25 minutes or so. But really, it's going to be Steve and I going back and forth talking about this past year and really thinking about what the future holds and way to be more conscious capitalist and use conscious capitalism principles to get through tough times and to get to the other side of this pandemic stronger than before. But I want to start at the beginning with you, Steve, and just ask, can you tell us when you realized you weren't just a capitalist, but a conscious capitalist, and why you built up your companies on conscious capitalist principles?
I'm not sure there was a period in time that I recognized and woke up one day. I didn't see it as kind of a commencement or a graduation that I'm now all of a sudden a conscious capitalist. I think it's just been a long, slow and steady journey of learning. I think when I look back just at my life, I think there's several key events that may have influenced some of that. One was being raised by 2 entrepreneurial parents. My mom was a nurse and worked nights at the hospital. And I think, through my relationship with her, I learned a lot about the importance and just having the confidence to go into business with leading with love and care and compassion and humility, and that those were actually strengths, not weaknesses, which, in automotive, it's historically been a very male dominated industry, and it tends to take on different values that conflict with those. On the other side, my dad was in the Army and then built his career in HR and management consulting. And so from there, I learned the importance of training and development and coaching and lifelong learning and teamwork. So I think those things helped influence my conscious capitalism journey. And then I think that the next event was probably taking a summer job in the automotive industry, just as a way to pay for college. And that really showed me that there's some really great cultures and there's some really toxic cultures. And the learning that I took away from working in automotive before I started my own business is that I could really see that just because there's a toxic culture and there's poor leadership doesn't mean that there's bad people. And what I found is my journey has taught me that in most of the organizations I worked in, even if the culture was toxic, the people were good. They wanted to do the right thing. And I think where they just fell short of that is the pressure of meeting short-term performance numbers, the incentive plans that they were tied to, the lack of training. I mean, one of the things that I got exposed to was the training around self-awareness, and really recognize how I was showing up and what were the gaps in me walking my talk. And so I think that led a lot, the more I worked on myself and the more I became more self-aware of the impact and how my own leadership shortcomings were impacting other people's performance, helped me on my conscious capitalism journey. And then, just being a part of the conscious capitalism community, attending the CEO summit, it was just for the first time, back, I think it's 2011 or 12, when I attended it, I could really see that, there's a bunch of leaders in the world that are rooting for the same thing for business that I'm rooting for. And that there are other people that have done it on the big stage that I know that can scale. One of the challenges is being in the used car side of the business, is there's, tens of thousands of independent dealers and, about 18,000 franchise dealers, and very few of them scale. It's still a pretty mom and pop industry. And it just shows that toxicity does not scale. And so I think all of these factors played a significant part in helping me recognize the importance of becoming a conscious leader.
I mean, when we think of the definition of a toxic industry, I think many people would probably say used car sales is that definition. And yet you built a conscious company and a business on conscious capitalist principles in one of the most toxic industries that we can imagine. What was that like, and how did you do that, though?
I think several things. One, it starts with what's the work that's mine to do. I think the one thing I recognized is if I wasn't willing to do the work that I was needing to do in filling my own leadership gaps, then I was never going to create the space for others to do the work that they need to do, because they were going to spend their time fixing my inadequacies. So what were some of those things? One was, I mentioned I'm a continuous learner. I love to innovate. I love to bring in new ideas, but that also, that attachment to newness and novelty can bring in so many ideas that it overwhelms people. And what I used to kind of think as resistance was just really exhaustion. And I didn't realize how much my my passion for innovation was holding back people. Little things like just my body language when I'd go into meetings and how I would show up in my body language. I was saying one thing, but I was communicating something differently. How I frame things, how much of what I again thought was resistance was just a lack of clarity as to, why is this important? And so, I think the first part of becoming a conscious company is the recognition for me was organizations don't change, cultures don't change until the leader starts to begin the process first. And through the leader, you start to create the conditions for other people to do the work. I think the other thing that was really helpful was to surround myself with people that would challenge me. And really, I would go to them and say, this is one thing I really want to work on, and I need you to call me out on it. And the more that I surrounded myself with people who were giving me the brutal facts, the tough news, were really to help me stay accountable and true to the things that I was asking them to hold me to, was great. And then how I responded to their feedback. One of the things I learned from Marshall Goldsmith was the importance of, when you get feedback, you only have 2 words to say, and that's thank you. And as soon as you start to move beyond thank you and you start justifying why you did something, that person is likely to say, you don't really care. All you really care about is justifying your behavior, not changing your behavior. And so I think that's the first stage of becoming a conscious company is do the work yourself, is what my experience has taught me.
I love that message, that it starts with the leader and starts with our personal work before you change the culture of a company or the company in general. And I think a lot of people have been going through a lot of personal work and a lot of work on their companies in 2020, given just how challenging the year was. But beyond 2020, I'm curious if you could share with everyone here a time when you personally felt beat up, pushed down, you faced another challenge in running your business, and how you got through that doing your own work and leaning on conscious capitalism.
Yeah, I mean, one thing I've come to realize is that business is going to go through cycles. And, we've had 9/11 that I was part of. I had the financial crisis, the part of COVID. And what I've drawn from those experiences, it's not what you do in that environment that really matters. For me, it was, what are the things we did leading up to the downward cycle that were able to get us through? And so let me share with you what some of those things are. When we would go into a downward cycle, we would see our stakeholder community deal with a lot of uncertainty. That uncertainty creates fear. That fear starts to be able to say, who do I trust? And that trust is based on past behaviors and how you supported and treated them. And if you go into a downward cycle and you haven't built a lot of trust with your stakeholder community, it's going to be really tough to keep the business alive. And I remember that in 2008 and 2009, we were heavily tied to auto financing, and especially in what really started to grow our business was the subprime financing, and that all dried up. And we had no idea how we were going to stay in business. And we luckily had a few lenders that were willing to continue to provide financing for our consumers to weather that storm. And why, and we asked them, years later, is, first, thank you for staying with us, but what made you stick with us when you terminated relationship? Because they were securitizing money, and so their pool of capital to lend shrunk, and so they had to kind of just pick the dealers that they wanted to weather the cycle with. And what they said was, we trust that you will have our best interest in mind. And how they gained that was, we would often call them and we would tell them things that they could do to improve their profitability with us. So we would call, like, Capital One was a great lender for us, and we would say, you are winning business in this segment of the consumer credit bucket. You could raise your rates and charge us more money and still be competitive there, but you're losing business over here. So we were able to show them how to charge us and make more margin in one area, because we trusted them to move that and make margin in another area. And what we found is that most of the lenders that were making a premium from us were using that money to innovate and create, and they would ask us to serve on advisory boards. And we got to be a part of creating programs that were brought into the industry. And while they weren't exclusive programs to us, because we never really wanted exclusivity, but what we were able to do is be a part of creating those programs, get a jump on the marketplace, and be able to determine how we would design our business model around the changes that are coming. Other things that we did in the crisis is we called it the drive home for our employees. And what we believed is that how someone drives home from work is going to make a huge difference. And two areas. One is how they show up at home. And if their drive home, they feel that they are leaving a job that has a sense of security, that they're not going to be fired or terminated or reprimanded for making a simple mistake. They have a sense of belonging. They believe that there's others around them that care about their performance, care about their career, that they can lean on, that they're having success in the job, that they're feeling they're making some type of personal achievement. There's meaning in the work beyond just that's benefiting themselves. And finally, there's financial upside for them to grow. When they have those things and they're driving home feeling good about those 5 areas, they're more likely to have deep conversations with their spouse, with their kids. And that, by doing that, changes how they drive in the next day and how engaged they're going to be and how committed they're going to be. And when you go through these downward cycles, if you don't have that, you can't do it in this cycle. At least we couldn't. We had to have built that trust long before the bad luck event came to us. We had to build the trust with the employees. We had to build that trust with the suppliers. We had to build that trust with our shareholders. We had to build that trust with the community. Otherwise, they would have left us. And when you have your stakeholder community start to leave you and focus internally, it just gets a lot tougher to stay alive, and it puts more pressure on fewer people.
I really appreciate actually the way that you even started all of that by pointing out it's not about what you do in the challenging moment, but all the preparation leading up to it that allows for the transformation. Because I think we've even seen that with the conscious capitalism movement at large over this past year. The movement has been building up for over a decade. So much work was put in to establish these principles of businesses having a higher purpose, stakeholder orientation, conscious leadership, and conscious culture that a decade ago were laughed out of boardrooms. They weren't represented at conferences. They weren't talked about in the media. And over the course of 2020, as Alan Murray from Fortune has documented, CEOs and businesses are jumping on board with these principles now. We've seen an acceleration with the number of businesses picking up these principles in a challenging time period, knowing that this is the way through. But it wasn't something that came to them out of nowhere. It's because so much work was put in by conscious capitalist leaders like yourself, like so many of you on the call today, to get to a place where we were in the right position when the challenge came to introduce this to other businesses.
That's right.
Now, I wanted to talk about a particular area of work that you did in driversselect and that you focused on, which is about hiring. Because I know that you took a unique approach to that in the industry, and I'm curious if you could share with that what you did there with everyone.
Yeah, and this again is just learning that was acquired over probably a decade, and what we found was we were overvaluing experience and undervaluing raw talent. And what I mean by that is we would often, as we were growing, we would wait for the revenues and the sales to show up and then backfill them with people. And what that really did was it almost in a way forced us to hire people with experience because they could immediately hit the ground running, and it was less upfront work for us, and we could just jump in and continue to grow. The downside of that is if you're in a business that has any type of change, and especially just knowing my own leadership is I want to be out there innovating and testing and piloting lots of new things. What happens is a lot of the people that we were bringing in had really good experience. We would plug in and they would have immediate success for a short period of time. But their clay would, I look at it as clay. Their clay was really, really hard and molded. And because who they were was developed over years and years and years of time. So they had all this, decade worth of industry experience, and it was extremely difficult, time consuming and expensive to break that clay. And so first 6 months, we saw great performance, but as we started to evolve and change and grow, we didn't have time to spend another decade trying to teach them something else. What we then learned was if you have the raw talent, and so one of the things that we looked for and tested for was what is their capacity to learn new things? We called it learning and reasoning ability. And if we knew they had a high propensity to learn new things quickly, we could teach them the auto business. And what that gave us was soft clay that we could mold, where they came in with the talents, the energy level, the humility, vulnerability to admit where they were struggling, where they were having difficulty adapting to the culture. We could mold that clay much easier. It was a lot more work up front, but only in the first 6-9 months. So if you look at it, if your perspective is I got to fill this position and I've got to do, and you're looking at a 6-month time frame, I think we would always go with experience, and that held us back. When we started to say is, if we're looking at this hire as a multi-year, what's going to give us the best return? And it's the soft clay. And so we really started toward the end, probably the last decade, was to really focus on how do we get that raw talent? And we're just rigorous about that. And that really became one of our core focuses is let's get the raw talent and let's build the capabilities, not only to source that talent, but also make sure that we spend even more time onboarding and then developing. So one of the things that we did, and in fact, we got acquired by Sonic. They were really confused at why we would bring someone on and just let them hang out for the first week. And some of these positions were senior level positions, and we would just say, all we want you to do for your first week is just go and walk around and hang out and meet people and get to know people. And most organizations, and some of the organizations that I worked in, your first day is, one, if they know you're showing up, that's a real bonus. And then two is, where's my desk, or here's a bunch of paperwork, HR, you can fill all this stuff out. And that's your first day. And then, okay, we're going to move you right into training. You're going to watch a bunch of training workshops, and we're going to put you through all this. And you don't really meet the people. And so what we said is, if we slow up in that first week and they build a relationship, they have more of a sense of that security and they have a sense of belonging. And once they have those two things, their ability to learn new things is going to be easier down the road. But if they're having to worry about the first week after is, did I make the right decision? Do I even belong here? Do these people like me? Then they're probably going to say, oh yeah, I've got everything I need. And they're not going to admit things that need to be heard. And so just slowing up and really approaching this as raw talent that's going to take a lot more work up front, but much less down the road.
So let's talk about how you introduce these principles into the business and how you introduced conscious capitalism into driversselect. What was that like? Did you have to persuade people to get on board with it? Did you face challenges with it? Or how did you introduce this to the company?
Yeah, so I had a really poor history of going to conferences and coming back with, we're changing, here's the new initiative, here's who we're becoming. And first it started to overwhelm people, then it started to confuse people. And then I think they're just like, hey, look, the way to navigate this with Steve is just listen, but it'll blow over because I think he's got another conference coming up in a couple months and it's going to bring in a new one. So just do a little bit of the work and then it'll change. And what I understood, from just being around the conscious capitalist community is this is something that's going to take a long, long time. And it's not going to be something you're going to be able to take into your organization and see immediate results. So you got to enjoy the journey and you got to believe in the journey that it's going to produce really great business performance. So what I would do is I would just talking about what are the things people care about, and then tie that back to conscious capitalism. So for instance, we would come in and we started our meetings and we said, look, we understand that we're a fast growing company. There's lots of things happening inside, but there's also those things are impacting outside. So whenever we start a meeting, we do a quick check-in is on a scale of 0 to 10, 10 being the highest, how present do you think you can be for this meeting over the next hour? And is there anything on your mind that the group can support you with? And it was amazing. Once again, it goes back to, does the leader participate first? And I had to get vulnerable there. And I would have to go in and say, yes, I was home last night and I just got an argument with my spouse and we just not agreeing on, what the proper path with my middle son should be or my youngest son. And that just really, I'm still carrying that with me into this meeting. And that would create the space for others to share. And so I'd get feedback and they'd be like, oh, we're really enjoying that. How'd you think of that? I'd be like, well, that's just part of my conscious capitalism journey. We would have some of our people come in, and talk to us at our kickoff events. And so I remember a trucker coming in and talking about why he delivers cars for us. And he shared this even with the Sonic folks who acquired us. But he shared his story about, look, when I get your orders, we had this transportation network where we buy cars at auctions all over, mainly Odessa. I know they're on the call. But we buy cars all over and we send it out to local truckers to pick up and bring. And he was like, I always enjoy getting your cars first and bringing them here because I know that you guys treat me like a human being. We're like, what do you mean? He said, well, when usually the cars that I get are out of Riverside, California, and I pick them up on Friday and you guys want them over the weekend. So I have to leave my coaching with my daughter's softball game. And that's hard on me. And normally when I deliver to dealers, I show up, no one's expecting me. They tell me I can't park out front. I have nowhere to park. I go into the showroom. They kick me out of the showroom because I'm, greasy. And then they finally tell me where to park the cars. And then they tell me they're going to mail me my check 2 weeks later and I got to chase the money. And what you guys do is you guys come in and, you call ahead, tell me where to park, you greet me before I even unload the cars, you hand me a check, you trust that I've taken good care of your cars. And if there's damage, that I'll file with my insurance company and pay you back. You invite me in, you to enjoy lunch with you. You pack me some snacks to take back, and you always send a thank you email or a thank you note. He says, that just makes me feel good. And so the employees were like, where'd you learn that? And we're just like, oh, that's part of just my conscious capitalism journey is building a culture of care. And when you care about people, it's very reciprocal. And my conscious capitalism journey has told me that whatever I desire, I give away. So if I want someone to listen to my ideas, I need to listen to theirs more. If I want to make certain decisions, I have to give decision making away. If I want someone to grow and stay with us, I have to make sure I'm investing in the skills and resources. And that's all part of my conscious capitalism journey. And so what that did was people were started saying, oh, now I get conscious capitalism. Now I can see that those are things I value. And if you can connect conscious capitalism to something that they value, then they're more likely to consider that as a practice and being able to buy into that. But they have to see it as something that aligns with their personal values and something they believe, more importantly, they can win at and they can enjoy winning at. And that's what we try to do.
Thank you, Steve. I want to turn it over to questions from everyone in a moment, but I want to talk about what you experienced in introducing conscious capitalism at Driver Select and how long it took, and if at any point you felt like it wasn't being done quickly enough or that you questioned giving up on it, because where we are today in the grand scheme of things is that it seems the world is on the conscious capitalism journey. We're getting closer to the tipping point now than ever before, but we're maybe not as far as some people want us to be. We think it should have happened sooner, or maybe it's not going to happen. At any point, did you ever question whether you were on the right path or it wasn't being done quickly enough? And how did you work through that as we think about how we work through this for other businesses and just the economy in general?
So, I mean, certainly I would have loved to have gone faster than it did. I mean, I'll always hope for that, but I never questioned it because I stayed connected to the community, and I've always found throughout my career the things that I value are typically tied to the people that I'm spending the most time with. And that I never realized. I remember my mom and dad telling me earlier on about some of the friends I was hanging out with. They're like, that's not good for you. And I've always discounted that. But later in life, you realize that the people that you hang out with and spend the most time with are going to have a tremendous amount of influence on you. And so the more that I got involved in the conscious capitalism community and staying connected with those folks and spending more and more time with them, it was just easier for me to stay a part of it because I was rooted there. And so I never got tempted to shift courses, to think that it doesn't work. I think there's all kinds of temptations that get in the way. I think what I learned, what was best is, and I had a really good mentor, Alexander, Rand Stegan. And what I think I contribute the most to Rand and his Leadership Academy was he helped me get ready by getting rid of certain things. And I had to get rid of certain behaviors. I had to get habits, so I could get ready to be able to bring conscious capitalism into the organization and stay with it. And had I not gotten rid of those temptations and competing commitments and big assumptions and stories I was telling myself, I probably wouldn't have been able to stick with it. So I think a lot of it is really about what do you need to unload and get rid of so you can create the space for conscious capitalism to really thrive in your organization and not be so triggered and not be so tempted to get knocked off.
And I think that is so applicable to where we are right now in the changing new normal that we're facing and the prospects for the conscious capitalism to become the norm, because we all wish it had happened sooner. We all want it to happen more quickly, but it's the right thing and it's on its way now. And it requires just maintaining that that sense of higher purpose. And everyone here and everyone who has been a conscious capitalist before being a model for those who are new to these ideas, who are just starting on this journey and may have questions, may do it wrong, may step backwards in some ways, but being committed to that journey and supporting them on it as we transition to a more conscious capitalist normalcy going forward.
Yeah, I mean, I think you just gotta, are you willing to rethink a lot of what you've been taught? you're just looking back, I think there was knowledge that I was taught by mentors in business school and parents, and there's experiences that I had. And whenever those things conflicted, where what I was taught was different than what I was experiencing, the temptation is to always go with what you're taught. Because if I go with what I was taught, then I can protect myself from having to question everything. And if I start saying, wait, if I go with what I'm experiencing and it's conflicting with what I'm taught, what about all the other things that I was taught? Are those even true? And that's why it's so difficult. And sometimes you just really have to be able to allow yourself to talk to you versus you talking to yourself, I guess. And just being able to really think about, what is my experience telling me and how is that different? And it's fascinating to be able to see. It's like one of the things, I'll give you an example of that. One of the things that I was taught in the automotive community is the command and control. If you can control the sale, control the process, control everything, if you're in control, you're safe. If you're not in control, then things are going to fall apart and it's not going to go well for you. And that's a lot of the culture that I grew up in. And as I started to navigate through that, my experiences were telling me something different. And some of that was because I loved working on things that were kind of 1 to 5 years out. Anything inside 12 months, I just got bored with. And so I started to just delegate some of that stuff. And what I learned through that process was the actual more control you give away, the more in control you actually are, because you're handing control over to people who want more control, who want to own that, who want the opportunity to show what they can do. And so they're more likely to support you as a leader because they know you'll leave them in control. But if you're the type of leader that was trying to control everything, then it's more difficult. So that was just an example of something that I was taught and something I experienced that just didn't add up for me. And that helped me so much. And I think that was one of the biggest things and look, I had to get some really good coach. I didn't figure this stuff out on my own. I had a lot of really good coaches that worked with me on a weekly basis to help me hold that tension. Because I use an example, I don't have one right now, but it's kind of like a rubber band. And as you know, here's the organization, as you start growing, there's tension being formed. And the initial holding too much tension for me would always try to be like, okay, I just have to let go back some of it and give up on some of the growth. And that would just hold the organization back. Or I said, no, we're going to push through it. We're going to push through it. And if I grow too quickly, the rubber band snaps. So it's really about the art of how do you be able to grow and just know throughout your career, you're going to always have tension. And that tension is not bad. Why does holding tension have to always be defined as bad or stressful? It's actually just no different than going to the gym and getting a good workout and having a little soreness. Because it's stretching you. And that's what the coaches really helped me do.
Thank you, Steve. I think we're ready to turn it over to Q&A. I want to make sure that we get a chance to talk with others in the Indianapolis chapter now.
Awesome.
Well, I'm going to jump in here. This is awesome. And it does start with us. That's one of my major takeaways and not a surprise. I did want to quickly introduce Jim Money. There's a connection here, which is awesome. When we found out that Steve was speaking, Jim Money is the past co-president of the chapter here. He's the president of Automotive Finance Corporation, tied to the Car Global here. He and Steve know each other. Jim, I would love to have you just share in a minute or two a quick takeaway, knowing that you've been involved in this movement as well. And you know Steve, and certainly you know Alexander too. Thank you, Jim.
Yeah, so I think I've known Steve probably for 15, 16 years. So it's always great to see him. And the last time I think I saw him was in April of 19 at the Conscious Capitalism event in Arizona, which was always great to catch up. You know, Steve, I remember one thing about your dealership when I first met you, and it always kind of stuck with me. And it was when you talked about, you know, almost it was like you weren't in the business to sell cars, you were in the business to rebuild people's credit. And you were doing that process of helping people, you know, either build their credit or rebuild their credit. And I thought that was something that was very noteworthy. But actually, the more I got to understand conscious capitalism, it just fits square smack dab that what you're doing. You had this business culture of helping others basically rebuild their lives, and it was much more than just I sell cars. Which was really great. You had some great nuggets here today that just really you know, jumped out to me. You know, do the work yourself, and it all starts with you. But I love, you know, building trust with stakeholders, you know, prior to anything that's changing, and it's that whole concept of the drive home, which was really cool. And then without a doubt, I think a lot of us get caught up in this era at times, and that is overvaluing experience and undervaluing raw talent. And it's so much easier to help train, help refocus people that don't really know anything about that industry than it is trying to teach, you know, I hate to say it, you know, an old dog, new tricks. And so just a lot of good stuff. I don't want to take up any more time because I think folks have a lot of questions, and I want to make sure there's plenty of time for that. But it's always great connecting with you again, Steve.
Well, thank you, Jim. And I didn't realize I said that much, but you said in 2 minutes what I took 30. So it's well done. And also keep in mind, Jim was at the time when we talked about Business Our Dealership, he was, I think, CFO of the company that was really funding us. So we were on our best behavior when we always said the money guy's coming. So we got to be on our best behavior.
Yeah.
That's awesome. Well, so fun to reconnect you two here.
Yeah.
And again, kind of a neat coincidence that it happened. I am turning it over to Nathan Bobe of Delta Faucet, again, one of the leadership team members and co-founders. Nathan, I know you've been monitoring the chat. Please take the Q&A away. And I think we've got a good solid 10 minutes for that. So
we already got some in here, so I'm going to fire off.
6 minutes for it. 6 minutes. Sorry.
Okay. First one, I think, Alexander, this one's probably for you or Steve. What are the differences in bringing conscious capitalism to an existing business compared to a startup?
I'd love for you to take that, Steve. You've done both.
Yeah. I think the thing for me is balancing what I call is positional power in the organization. And in startups, you have both personal power because you're touching every employee a lot more frequently, but you also have positional power, potentially as founder, CEO, and then in the large organization, you move more to positional power. And the thing that I always found is my whispers came across as shouts. And the smallest little things that I did were just screaming through the organization. And so I think you have to really make sure that, are you introducing conscious capitalism for personal reasons, or are you really introducing it for the good and the benefit of others, and connecting that conscious and capitalism are not mutually exclusive, that they actually are there. The whole purpose to me, and what I learned, and again, this is just my takeaway from conscious capitalism, is really all it is for me is, am I aware, conscious? Am I aware of how I'm showing up in the organization and the impact that is having on the people that I rely to achieve the goals I want to achieve? I've got suppliers, I've got customers, I've got employees, I've got communities, I've got shareholders. And am I making and creating value for them through my own awareness of actions, behaviors, policies, procedures, my own growth and development. And I've come to realize the greatest gift that I can give those folks is my own continuous learning and development. Because as I grow as a leader, I now can serve them better. But if I'm putting all the focus on having other people adopt conscious capitalism and pushing conscious capitalism, that this is what we're doing, and I'm not modeling that, it's going to be a tough road.
All right, next question. This one is for Alexander, talking about conscious capitalism expanding across the world, different chapters, different cultures. As conscious capitalism is expanding globally, what's your advice to apply the 4 tenets in the society with a different culture than the US? Could you share some good examples from international chapters?
So the principles of conscious capitalism, as whoever asked that seems to realize, apply across cultures, nationalities, areas. These are fundamental principles of just treating people like human beings, as Steve was talking about before. That's really what it comes down to at the end of the day. And even in the United States, we have different cultures in different parts of the country, even in different parts of the same state sometimes, as we all know. So as we expand globally, as we're expanding domestically as well, it's about maintaining a commitment to those principles of having a higher purpose, stakeholder orientation, finding win-win-win solutions, conscious leadership, developing your own leadership in leading an organization, and creating a conscious culture that will vary from business to business and culture to culture. That shows up differently, not only in every country, but in every state and in every business, because it's about the values that the company and the individuals are led with more than the specific actions that they take. So really just thinking, like Steve said a moment ago, being aware of how you're showing up, how your company is showing up, and the implications of that, and living up to the greatest potential of yourself and your company in whatever culture it is, whatever country it is.
Cool. Excellent. Thank you. Last question we have here is for Steve. You talked about getting different coaches, and one of the attendees wanted to know, what coaches did you use?
Yeah. The best for me was by far the Stagen Leadership Academy. It's actually based in Dallas. Alexander, I know you've had some experience with them and gone through and used their coaches. And specifically speaking, it was the best tool for me to create this self-awareness and identify the gaps that needed to be filled for me to achieve the things that I wanted to achieve and create the impact that I wanted to impact. So I could not say enough great things. I know, Alexander, we've talked and you feel similar, but Stagen Leadership, I think it's Stagen.com.
All right. Thanks, guys. Kim, back to you.
Well, we're right on time. Thank you all. And thank you so much, Alexander and Steve, for joining us. I think there's some amazing nuggets here that we're going to capture and we're going to send back to people as part of our follow-up. One of the neat things about what's happened in the last year is, in fact, this pivot to virtual. There's even more accessibility beyond even our chapter in terms of the resources of CCI. So please, I know the link was shared to our chapter. There's other resources at the international level. So please investigate, take advantage. It's awesome. And again, it all starts with us. Quickly in wrapping up, I did want to acknowledge that we exist as a chapter to discover and embrace and embed the principles of conscious capitalism in our central Indiana state. It doesn't happen without our champions. You know, this really is a volunteer effort, and we want to thank these amazing organizations. And please feel free. We would love to add to the champions. Have to admit, our expenses have been a little bit less this past year, not having events, but we will look forward to bringing that back. So again, thank you, companies that support us, champions. Thank you all as leaders. And I'm turning it over to our new co-president with me this year, Leslie Pagel, another founder of the chapter, who's with Anthem. Leslie, thanks for giving us a preview of what's coming.
Wonderful. Thank you, Kim, and thank you, Alexander and Steve. Very a great way to start our year of bringing conscious capitalism to the Indianapolis community. Really, what I'm not going to walk through what we did last year. You can read that, but just want to kind of ask for your input and then also share with you some of the things that we have planned for this year. We're coming off of a year where we had a lot of momentum. We actually went into 2020 calling it the year of experimentation, and we had no clue that COVID was going to like force that on us. So we're coming out of a year where we accomplished a lot. We do have a lot of momentum, but we still have a lot of work to do to bring conscious capitalism into our community. And I love Don's comment earlier about how do we get this into the high schools and colleges, because capitalism is becoming a bad word. And that's where our community can come together to really create an impact. In 2021, we're really all about just getting more engagement in our community, and would love it if you could open up the chat and just jot down some things that we should consider to bring into the community this year. Definitely want to hear your voice as we plan out the year. We do have a couple things planned. We're going to continue with quarterly events. Those will be wrapped around the 4 tenants and really digging into what are some of the ways that companies are making progress and bringing these 4 tenants into their organization. We know that the quarterly events are great, but a lot of times the behavior happens in the conversation. So we're going to be looking to bring out the conversation throughout 2021 so that we can really explore the topics further and have a meaningful dialogue. And then the third thing is really about just continuing to make people aware of conscious capitalism. We're going to be doing the basics of business as a force for good throughout the year. So think of it as Conscious Capitalism 101. We've got the first one scheduled for right around the corner, March 10th. So if you've had people ask, what is conscious capitalism? Direct them to this event, because that's the place where they're going to get the basics on conscious capitalism. So look forward to seeing you again in future events this year. And thank you to Alexander and Steve for kicking us off. And please share your thoughts, ideas, suggestions in the chat. We'll make sure to take those as we start to plan. Thank you.